Most gracious Heavenly Father, Creator of all of us, blessed be thy name. We thank you for all your blessings and for putting us in one of the most beautiful places on earth, in Hawaii. Father, this day we thank you for all of your blessings and for sending thy servant, Srila Prabhupada, here to begin the process of the spiritual consciousness of the Krishna consciousness. Father, surely he stands there even at this moment beside you, looking down with pride and with gratitude and with love among this group. Father, we ask your blessing on everyone here who is involved with the ISKCON movement. May your blessing be upon them and everyone they touch, so that they may bring thy peace, thy harmony, and thy love to this world, so that your mission on earth may be accomplished. Those things we pray, no kamea, no kia puri ame kamana, me ka ho'onani ia amawa atu. Amen. Amen.
Thank you, Dr. So, our next guest, you may all be familiar with. This is Senator Mike Gabbard. And Senator Mike Gabbard is not only works in the legislature, but he really works with the people. And he's a member of the Hawaii State Legislature and the Senate, and representing District 20?
Right.
District 20. And he has been a senator since 2006. He and his daughter Tulsi co-founded the Healing Hawaii Coalition, protecting environment, improving individual and community health. He's active in schools, teaching watershed protection and many other projects. The Aloha Parenting Project that he and his wife Carol have started in the island. And also he's a champion of environment, organic farming, and chairman of the Environmental and Energy Committee. Agriculture. Can't read my handwriting, so not great classes. And I have a factoid that I'm going to share with everybody, that with all these other wonderful accomplishments, he's actually a very accomplished musician and singer. I couldn't resist. Okay. So today, Senator Gabbard is going to present Shanta. He's going to present a proclamation from the Senate.
Actually, before Shanti, I do that, I want to say a few words.
Thank you.
All right. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Hello, my kako, and namaste, everyone. It's an honor to be here. Before I make the presentation, I just wanted to share a little bit about my appreciation for Srila Prabhupada and what he's meant in my life. I was raised in a very devout Catholic family, and one of the things that I did as a child in Catholic school, of course, we had to memorize these verses in the catechism. And I see some Catholics in the crowd here, so they're nodding their head. And one of the verses that we had to memorize, and it stuck with me for quite a long time, was, what is the goal in life? And the answer was, to know, love, and serve God. And that question and that answer stuck with me, and was always a part of me. When I was 14 years old, I decided I wanted to become a priest. So I went to the seminary at Mother Good Counsel Seminary in just west of St. Louis, Missouri, and had a very good experience. There were about 200 of us seminarians at that point, and I was introduced to Gregorian chanting. And some of you may be familiar with Kyrie eleison. Lord have mercy. Christe eleison. Christ have mercy. So imagine this, 200 male voices singing a cappella, 3-part harmony. In Hawaii we say chicken skin, chicken skin. In fact, people from all over Missouri would come. Our Sunday masses were just packed with people who would come to hear the chanting. And that was the most incredible experience I had for that 1 year. I stayed for 1 year, and then I came, we were living in Florida at the time. But I remember when I was there, that question that I memorized, that question and answer about what is the goal of life, to know, love, and serve God. I went to one of my mentors and I said, what does this mean? And I want to know more about God. And that if I'm going to love Him and serve Him, then I need to know, can you give me some more information? And I remember he looked at me and put his arm around me and he said, son, God is a mystery. And I said, okay, thank you, Father. God is a mystery. But it always kind of puzzled me. If Lord Jesus' first and foremost commandment is to love the Supreme Person with all your heart, all your mind, and all your being, He's not loving a mystery. He's loving a person, right? So that's the thing that just didn't sit with me. Who is Jesus loving? He's having this very intimate, loving relationship, but it's not with a mystery. And so, Carol and I, we just celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary a couple weeks ago. She was raised Methodist, and then as a Catholic, we were living in American Samoa. I was the first returning Samoan that had a degree in English. So they had me teaching in the high schools, and I was at the community college, and I was kind of being groomed to become the president of my college. And so we were studying all these different Eastern religions because we both were inquiring. We wanted to know more about God, and I was, many times I would reflect back upon my days in the seminary and that question. And then I ran into a guy on the side of the street one day. This is in Pamu, American Samoa, 5 hours southwest of here. And a friend of mine at work had told me about this guy because he said he was talking about Krishna and all these classes. So I happened to run into this guy on the way home from work and asked him where he was staying. He says, well, I can't stay at the hotel because it's too expensive. Come stay with me. So he stayed at our place. And one of the first things he said, would you mind if I cook while I'm here? I'm going to be here for 4 days. And I said, yeah, sure, go, yeah. So he set up and bought the vegetables, and we were already vegetarians, and he had these little forms that he'd make this special plate, and then he'd put his head on the ground and offer this to this little forms. And then he talked to us about Krishna and introduced me to the books of Bhaktivedanta Swami. Oh. And as I read the books of Bhaktivedanta Swami, I began to understand that to that priest that I asked that question, that important question, God was a mystery to him, but he was not a mystery to Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And the more, and I learned from this guy who was staying with us, I started chanting God's names, and the more I began to appreciate and understand about all those verses in the Bible about our help is in the name of the Lord. Save me, O Lord, by thy name. Lord Jesus saying, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And so when I began to understand that God is his name, and that when you say and hear his name conscientiously and attentively, that has a purifying effect on your heart, your mind, your consciousness. So I was chanting Krishna and the Maha Mantra, and the word for God in Samoan is Oleatua. So I had a Oliatua, Haribo. And sometimes some of the villages, we'd go out and chant with the villagers, and they were hardcore Christians, and they were just, but they had a good time. We were dancing, and I had a guitar out and everything. It was just, but I began to understand more and more all those questions that I had growing up as a Catholic. They began to get answered in a very real way. And so I just wanted to share that with you. Because as I read the Bhagavad Gita as it is, and as I read parts of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Nectar of Devotion, and then just the wonderful writings of Bhaktivedanta Swami, and began to understand who he is and his mission in following his spiritual master's instructions, I began to appreciate who I am and what my goal in life is. And so I have to apologize. I'm a lector at St. Jude's Church in Makakilo, and I tried to get someone to be a sub for me today, but I could not find anyone, so I had to leave right at 4 o'clock for the 5 o'clock Mass. So I'd like to make the presentation now. That's right. I was going to wear my Tulsi 2020 t-shirt, but I thought it might be a little skin of the Okay.
We would have accepted.
So here, this is a proclamation from the State Senate honoring and commending His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, upon the 50th anniversary of his arrival to Hawaii. Quoting him, "When we understand our relationship with God, then we all will be happy. It is an essential factor for establishing peace in the world." And then in the text here, His Divine Grace Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada is the founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, also known as the Hare Krishna movement. Born on September 1st, 1896 in Kolkata, India, Srila Prabhupada is recognized worldwide as the foremost exponent of the Gaudiya Vaishnava philosophy, having translated over 60 volumes of classic Vedic texts and establishing 108 temples, farm communities, and restaurants internationally between 1965 and his passing on November 14, 1977. In 1922, when he first met his spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Bhaktivedanta was requested to spread the message of Vedic knowledge in the English language. In 1944, he started a publication called Back to Godhead, for which he acted as writer, designer, publisher, editor, copy editor, and distributor. When he was 69, Bhaktivedanta took a difficult journey to America aboard a freighter. He arrived in New York practically penniless, but rich with the desire to please his spiritual teacher and help people in the Western world find true spiritual happiness. Another quote from Bhaktivedanta Swami. "The highest achievement of perfect civilization is to work with valor, but at the same time depend completely on the Lord." And then continuing in the text, in late 1968, Srila Prabhupada sent his disciples to establish the Krishna consciousness movement in the Hawaiian Islands. The first temple opened in Ka'ava in January of 1969. Bhaktivedanta spent time in Hawaii on 9 occasions. His followers welcomed people of all races and faiths to engage in the interfaith and interdenominational recognition and worship of God by chanting the Maha greatest mantra, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And another quote, "The mission of life is to revive the dormant divine consciousness in every living being." So the Hawaii State Senate hereby honors and commends His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada upon the 50th anniversary of his arrival to Hawaii. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. On behalf of all of the devotees who have served in the temples over the many, many years here, it is a complete honor for us to receive this proclamation from the distinguished senator, and as well as the the very beautiful Oli. And I would like to have this framed, it is framed, but hung in the wall so that everyone who visits can appreciate this. There's one of the very early devotees, one of the 3 disciples who was made here out of Haravapuh, Prabhu, who was unable to attend due to scheduling conflicts. But he shared with me a story. It's relevant because we're about to have our Ratha Yatra. And this is a story, his experience in traveling to Puri, India, on the train. And it's very much like our experience here with the movement and the temple. He said sometimes spiritual life goes along, okay, you're going in the right direction, like you're on the train and you're moving along, but sometimes that train stops. And on the way to Puri, they have a lot of stops. And sometimes the train actually goes in reverse. Okay? And you could almost get off and walk, it would be faster. But if you stay on the train will go forward again, and you will finally get to your destination. So he says spiritual life is like that. Sometimes you suffer reversals. Sometimes in this temple we have experienced, it seems like things have gone very slow, and sometimes it seems things are going in the wrong direction. But if we try to stay true to the principles and guidelines that Srila Prabhupada has given us, we know that eventually things will pick up again and we'll go back in the right direction. It would be nice if we never had any tribulations, but that's just not realistic in this world. Once again, I would like a very sweet story. My mother is a St. Louis resident and Catholic, and not on my father's side, but she also was going to become a nun and lived for quite some time, and then she decided to have a family, so she left. She never became a nun. But many of the things in the ashram that we do were similar to what you probably experienced in the seminary. So very heartwarming. What is that? Otumi? The Samoan word for God?
God. Oh, Oleatua.
Oleatua.
In Hawaiian, Keakua.
Yeah,
So if you say Keakua meke aloha, that's God bless you. Hawaiian, right? Or aloha keakua, God is love.
Once again, thank you very much.
I wanted to add one other thing. While I never had the honor of meeting Srila Prabhupada in person, I was at a conference coming from Samoa in Denver, and then stayed at the Denver Temple, and I was told that there was a Ratha Yatra festival at Golden Gate Park in San Francisco, and that if I should stop by, because A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada was going to be there, so I made it a point, and I saw him from a distance, and he was smiling and chanting, and I knew at that point that the actual meeting in person was not that important because we had already met in our hearts. So it was a very powerful meeting. Thank you very much.
Srila Prabhupada said that Hawaii was the place where the demigods came for water sports, and that Hawaii was 50 years behind Kali Yuga, because while we had jungles and forests, we had no predators, we had no aggressive, ferocious animals. We didn't even have snakes. From my Hawaiian history, we didn't have mosquitoes until the 1830s, when Chinese cargo ships started offloading cargo in Hawaii, and rats and cockroaches and lizards and scorpions ran free in the Hawaiian Islands.
I was at the Ala Loop Temple when Prabhupada first came, and I remember I had to wash the driveway, and I had a lot of water, was all in the driveway, and then I was excited to see Srila Prabhupada, because after reading his books and after reading Bhagavad Gita, I was anxious to see the Acharya, the Guru, and when he came in, I remember, his look. He didn't seem very, grand or great or very significant, but I just sensed that, you know, there was something special about him because of what he had, you know, given to us in Bhagavad Gita. You know, so then he walked in, and the devotees made a comment that one devotee, hey, Srila Prabhupada said something about the driveway with all that water in there, you know. So I later went back to Sudama Maharaj and asked him, what did Prabhupada say about the driveway and all the water? He said, water is very purifying. You know, I mean, that's my first contact with Srila Prabhupada. And then he gave the lecture the next day, and I asked him a question after the, you know, questions. I asked him the question, where is the soul in the body? Is the soul in the heart, in the area of the heart, or in the lotus of the heart? Because I had read so many yoga books and saying the soul is in the lotus of the heart. So I just wanted some confirmation from Srila Prabhupada. And he, I'm sure many devotees have heard this lecture where Prabhupada goes, you know, what are you, medical man? He says, why do you want to know in so much detail? You know, what are you, medical man? And then he went on to say, what does it matter? So much detail, you know, the soul on the left, on the western side, on the eastern side, just read my books, you know. So the devotees thought that I was like a little set back by his so boom into me, you know. And I said, no, that was very ecstatic. I thought that was great, you know. So.
Well, I was just arrived in Hawaii. I had been in Hawaii for about 3 weeks or so, and I was getting a little frightened and frustrated, and I wanted to find out if there was a temple here. I had never been to a Hare Krishna temple, but I always wanted to go. And so I went to Manoa Valley. Someone said there was a temple in Manoa Valley. I walked there, and there was nothing. And then I went to Kalihi Valley, nothing. Then one day I saw a devotee in a dhoti walking, and I asked him if he was a Hare Krishna. He said, yes. I says, boy, I've been looking all over for you guys. He says, well, our spiritual master is here. He says, why don't you come with me and you can see him? And I didn't know what a spiritual master was. So I followed him, and I came into the temple. Prabhupada was here. He came into the temple room. Everybody fell to the floor. I was the only one standing, because I didn't know why they were falling on the floor. And so it was just me and Prabhupada. We were the only ones upright. And he looked me dead in the eye. And all I could think of was, he's so familiar. Where have I seen him before? And he sat on the Vyasasana and began to speak with this deep, beautiful, thunderous voice. And I couldn't make out much of what he was saying. I'd hear sex, and I'd hear dog. And so I was thinking, maybe this is what I needed to hear. So I was very impressed, very impressed. The temple was packed with devotees. It was at night, and I had to go to work that evening. So when I went home, or went to work, that mantra was going through my head. I just couldn't get it out. So I came back the next day. I wanted to join. Because when I first saw Prabhupada, it was like all of the magic came back. I grew up Christian. My family was very close to the church. So we went to Sunday school, and we were always reading about angels appearing here and Jesus doing this and that. And I often wondered why, you know, these things aren't going on anymore. But when I saw Prabhupada, it was like the magic was there. Here was a real mystic. And I could feel, I finally learned that it was called prema bhakti. I could feel this prema emanating from him, and it went right through me. I felt complete relief, complete security, complete contentment. I was very, very impressed. So I didn't have to ask questions. I knew this was the man. So for the rest of the week, I was struggling, trying to figure out how can I get into this movement. And I came back again, and they suggested that I go to Siddha Sarup. He was having a yoga retreat. And he says, there you can learn about the philosophy. So I took a flight to Kauai, beautiful island. And he had a retreat up in the mountains for about a week or so. And they invited me to live on their farm. And then I heard that Prabhupada was coming back to Hawaii. So I left Kauai and came back over. And this was the second time. This time I stayed in the temple while he was here. And I heard all of his lectures. The chanting was so blissful. He smelled like sandalwood and gardenias. And I was just so happy to be in his presence. So my life, that was the happiest time in my life. So I thought success at last, you know.
The first time I met Prabhupada, I was in Vancouver, British Columbia. And I told my temple president, Bahudak, I want to go meet Prabhupada. And he said, if you want to please Prabhupada, you stay here and do your service. I said, Jai Prabhu. So the minute he left the temple, I packed a tiny little bag, put on a red coat, and ran out of the back door of the temple. So I wanted to meet Prabhupada. And he's coming into Los Angeles the next day. On those days, it's hippie time, so it was very difficult to get across the border if you didn't have money. So when I got to the border, there were two custom officers, and because I was wearing a dhoti and shaved head, and they said, it looks like we have a Mormon here. And they start laughing. And they're laughing, and they say, go ahead. So they led me through. That was like, to me, I said, this is a miracle. This doesn't happen. So that night, I hitchhiked to the border of Oregon. And from the border of Oregon to Los Angeles I think it's 1,100 miles. It's a good 20-hour drive, 25-hour drive. So I got up as early as the sun came up. I got up. First car that comes by is a brand new Corvette. And it stopped. And he said, where are you going? And I said, I'm going to LA. He says, today is your lucky day. So then I noticed on his dashboard, he had all these gadgets to track the speed traps. So he was cruising at least 100 to 120 miles an hour. Yes, and he was actually a very young, handsome, very friendly. And so before I knew, we were in LA. Like, Prabhupada's coming 4:30 to LA. And he just happened to be going 2 blocks from the temple. So he dropped me off, and I ran. I knew what the temple was. I had a little map. I ran to the temple. I asked where the showers are, and I ran upstairs, shower, put on new clothes, tilak. I ran down the stairs, because the bodies were chanting. They were waiting for Prabhupada already. And as soon as I came, Prabhupada's car is pulling on the back alley. This is in New Dwarka. Then all of a sudden, petals start falling from the sky. So like one of those real good movies where the king is coming in and there's music and trumpets. And so then the car stopped, and for some reason I thought Prabhupada would be tall because of the sound of his voice. So when he got out of the car, I noticed that he was a little short, but then when he got out, he saw the devotees and he saw the flowers, and he smiled, a big, big smile. And if you ever saw Prabhupada smile, you will understand what I'm saying. When he smiled, it's like I lost track of time, I lost track of place. And it seemed like an eternity, but at the same time, it seemed like a short time. But I felt like the first time you fall in love with a girl, if you multiply that 1,000,000 times, that's what I just felt like. Something overcome me. So Prabhupada got out of the car very gracefully, walked 3 or 4 steps and went into the door. And that's the first time I met him. So to me, that was a miracle, that Prabhupada made all these arrangements so I could be there on time. So he knew everybody's heart. He knew I wanted to be there when he came. So I had that opportunity.
Well, I actually don't know the exact year. It was either the first Rath Yatra that ISKCON had in America, or the second, which was both of them were in San Francisco. And at the time, should I keep talking? Yeah. At the time, I was living on Haight-Ashbury. Devotees my age would know what that's about. So I was living on the Haight, and we had heard that there was this going to be this big parade, and my friends and I went down to where it was beginning, and the big cart was there, the Rath Yatra cart was there, and everybody, the devotees and other people, were just waiting around, and we didn't know for what reason. And then a big, it looked like a Cadillac drove up. And then I think someone opened the door and out stepped Prabhupada. And of course we didn't know who he was. And then as he came out of the door, as he came out of the car, everyone else, we looked down, everyone was paying their dandavats. And we didn't understand what that was, because everyone was all of a sudden, on the street, laying on the street. And so I looked around, and we were the only ones standing at that point. And as Prabhupada came out, he was about actually as far as you are from me now. And he came out, and he stood up, and it was like this. We both saw each other. It was like locked, our eyes locked. And I just, it was an immediate feeling. It was immediately like I felt overwhelmed. And he didn't smile. He just was very serious, very sober. And he looked, and he came forward, and then he went onto the cart to help, because that was the Rath Yatra that he sat on the cart. And I was kind of shook up about it all. And we waited, and then finally they started the parade, the Rath Yatra. And we got involved. We actually we were hippies at the time, so we would, take drugs. And we took, I think it was mescaline that day. And we were very energetic. We all got on the ropes, and we were pulling the ropes. And I remember pulling them so hard that, looked down, there's old blisters. But the one memorable moment was, this was the Rath Yatra where there was the bridge, and they couldn't go under the bridge. They had designed a way to collapse the Rath Yatra cart, but it didn't work. It wasn't working. So, like, everybody was kind of, agitated because they couldn't get the cart down, and Prabhupada sitting there. So Prabhupada just got up and started chanting like this, And then everybody just became overwhelmed, including myself, and we just were chanting, and we never chanted before. We're just going back and forth, And then finally the cart came down, and they could go underneath the bridge, and we pulled it all the way to the beach. That was, the destination was the beach, and then they had all plates of prashadam waiting for everyone. At that time, after that, then there was a place called the Family Dog. where it's like a disco. And he was asked to speak at the family talk. And he went there and he sat down and everybody's kind of just waiting around, and he starts giving his lecture. And I don't remember hardly anything, except he started saying, he says, "You are not God. Do not think you are God." I don't remember too much else, but I remember then everyone around me was going, "Oh." You know, like, how can you tell us we're not God? Because at that point, that was when everyone, you know, was dropping acid or mescaline or anything, and that was the feeling they were getting, that they were God, you know. And there was booing. Some people booed. And I thought, oh. And he kept on speaking. And he kept on speaking on that point. And I thought, that was, you know, I stood there and I thought, oh, he's not speaking just to be, you know, applauded. He's not speaking because, you know, this is a popular thing to say. He obviously can see it's not. And he kept on speaking on that message. So that, you know, that I was super impressed.
First time I met Srila Prabhupada was Atlanta, 1975. And I was taken aback how such a powerful personality, but he was small in bodily form. So, but he had everyone controlled by love. We all had such strong love for Srila Prabhupada that whatever Srila Prabhupada would ask, we'd immediately jump to do it. And we were young, so a lot of times that was in a lot of many childish ways.
Srila Prabhupada would say that all of his temples were Vaikuntha, but the real truth is that Srila Prabhupada brought Vaikuntha with him everywhere he went. And for us, when we were with him, we had the opportunity to step into that Vaikuntha atmosphere, and we could feel this bliss, this comforting protection, and we could just feel this overarching feeling of love, overwhelming feeling of love. And that's the Vaikuntha bubble that Srila Prabhupada lived in, but he shared it with us when he was with us.
Anyway, then it went on where that I think the following day was going to be my initiation. And during the initiation lecture, Prabhupada said he invited everyone that he's going to cook the Sunday feast. And me, I was into like raw vegetables. I would go down on Sankirtan with raw peanuts, and you know, devotees used to like kick me out of the kitchen because I was, how can you eat like that? All these bad food combinations and this and that, you know. And I was sticking to my raw peanuts and raw cabbage. I would have it in my bag, you know, and that's all the only way I would eat. And at evening, I would come back and take some hot milk. But Prabhupada said he was cooking the feast, so I said, oh, I'm going to have to eat this feast. It would be very offensive if I don't eat it, you know. And so it came time where the initiation was going on, and then I believe Gajahanta got initiated, Danadar, there was a few devotees that got initiated that day. And you know, you go up, you say your 4 regular principles, you know, chant 16 rounds. But before I could say my 4 regular principles in 16 rounds, Prabhupada goes, so many lifetimes, hogs, dogs, camels, and asses, you try to enjoy your senses, you know. Just take this one lifetime, control your senses, and go back home, back to Godhead, you know. And he goes, your name is Sri Raga. Sri Raga means attachment to Krishna, you know, and then everybody jive. But it was a little lengthy little lecture he gave, you know. I guess he knew me from, you know, from Hawaii, you know, out on the beach and chasing the opposite sex and doing not so much nonsense.
In Los Angeles, 1973, I got a second initiation. So they asked us to bring Guru Dakshin for Prabhupada. So I went out and I collected, I think like $5. But I thought, I gotta do something special, because this is the greatest guru on the planet. I'm not gonna give him $5. I felt like so I went into the kitchen in LA asking for the biggest wok that they had, and I covered it with a tin foil, and I went to Balian's Market across the street and I bought about $50 worth of tropical fruit. It filled the wok, I could barely carry it. So if you've been to the LA temple, there's a bench outside where the devotees were waiting for second initiation. So there I am with my wok and full of fruit, and the first devotee went in and he came out crying, like in less than a minute. And we were like, wow, what happened? And he said, Prabhupada saw my bead bag and it wasn't clean. And he said, if you want to be a Brahmana, you first have to learn how to be clean. So go wash your bead bag and come back. So we all look at our bead bags and is it clean enough? So I wasn't sure, so I took the beads out of the bead bag and I put them around my neck. And I put the bead bag on my pocket. So I walk into the room with this wok, huge, full of fruit. And Prabhupada had his little desk on the floor as usual. And I put it in front of him. I said, no, he said, put it over there. He had a small altar. And then he said, do you chant 16 rounds? And I kind of a little proudly said, Srila Prabhupada, I chant 32 rounds. And I thought he would say, oh, that's great, or that's wonderful. But he didn't say anything. So then I sat in front of the desk, and he said, no, come sit here, right next to him. And then he said, he showed me how to count, and I couldn't do it. And he went like this, he says, not to worry, you will learn this. Then he said, I say, you say, and then he goes, Om Bur. And then somebody knocked on the door, and one of Prabhupada's secretaries, I think, and he said, Prabhupada, these are time-sensitive documents that you have to look at for the bank, and we have to get them there, like, right now. So he looks at me like this, smiling, and says, you're going to have to wait. So I'm sitting next to Prabhupada, and I didn't know what to do. So I thought, chant Hare Krishna. So I was chanting very softly. And it must have been about 15 minutes. Yes, this is the only time that I had close association with Prabhupada. So he looked at the papers and signed them, and then somebody came and picked the papers, and then he gave me the Gayatri, and then he got the Brahma thread. This Brahma thread's from India, they come folded up in a bundle. So he grabbed the thread and he ran it through his knees to straighten it out. And then he put the thread on me. And then he said, this does not make you a Brahmana. This gives you the opportunity to become a Brahmana. So this is very important. Just because you wear a thread doesn't mean you're a Brahmana. But if you act like a Brahmana, even if you don't have a thread, then you could be a Brahmana. But with a thread, and if you act properly, then you're really a Brahmana.
I was a kitchen devotee. I hadn't been initiated yet. So I was cutting up potatoes and vegetables and always in bliss in the kitchen. Srila Kirti came in. He was Prabhupada's servant. And he just took a liking to me. And he says, hey, you want to help me serve Prabhupada? And I said, sure. He says, so I want you to prepare his fruit plates. And he says, so Prabhupada is generally just eating fruits and some dab water. He says, so I want you to prepare that every day, you know. So I would get all of the mangoes that came in. There were kichi fruit, papayas. I would cut them up nicely, arrange them on the dish, and get flowers, put flowers around the tray, the plate. And I would walk it up to this room. And Prabhupada would be sitting at this little foot table. And I would put his plate there, and he would say, Jai. He would raise his hands. He said, Jai, this is what I've been waiting for. I thought he was talking about me, but it was the food. I would sit it down, and he would begin to eat, and it was like a little innocent boy, although he was an elderly man, but somehow I had the feeling he was like just a little kid, you know, and it was very nice. So I would go on out of the room. The next day, before I came up, Srila Kirti came to me and said, Prabhupada wants you to pay your obeisances when you leave. And so the next day, I set his fruit plate up very nicely with flowers and everything, and I brought it up. He said Jai at the same time. And I put it down, and so this time I remembered he wanted me to pay my obeisance. So I fell to the floor and just drew a blank. His presence was so overwhelming, and I was so happy, I couldn't remember the prayer. So I just stayed on the floor until I thought the prayer was over. I felt so embarrassed, but he didn't say anything, and I felt like this is a very kind-hearted man. Being in a black body, I could easily pick up when people are judging you by your physical presence. I never got that from Prabhupada. So I felt very, very safe. The next day, Srila Kirti came to me and said, there's some instructions I have for you. Prabhupada said that your pineapples that you cut are too sweet, and they should be tart. If they're sweet, then they're a little fermented. And then he said the dab water was good but cloudy. He said the dab water should be clear like water. And then the third instruction was the flowers. They're poisonous. I would put these oleanders around the plate, and none of us knew. We had all been in Hawaii for quite a while, and Prabhupada was visiting here, and he was the only one who knew that that flower was poisonous. So I stopped putting the flour on the plate. And so then I would come in, and this time I thought I did everything right. And so I asked him. I finally built up enough nerve to ask him, was everything okay? And he would bob his head and says, everything is fine, you know. So I felt so elated and happy. One other thing I didn't mention was that before I started making the plates, Srila Kirti warned me, because we had been trained, when you prepare food for Krishna, you don't taste anything. Your hands are clean, your mouth is clean, you just know what ingredients, how much to put in, everything. So I knew that. But he said, now you're serving Prabhupada, so you have to taste everything and make sure that it is, you know, proper. So I did, and I would use my own judgment, you know, as to how things tasted. But then he taught me some lessons.
Srila Prabhupada came to Atlanta. I'm remembering it was March 1975. So we were on the Radha Damodar party. So Tamal Krishna Goswami arranged for a special darshan with Srila Prabhupada. So we all went up into Srila Prabhupada's room, and Srila Prabhupada was very happy to see so many brahmacharis there. He looked at us, and he immediately started speaking about staying brahmachari. He said, you're all brahmachari, best if you can stay brahmachari. He didn't say we had to, he said best if you can. And he said, sex life, it's like an itch. And then he raised his arm, and he said, if you have an itch, he made a gesture of scratching. He said, if you scratch and scratch and scratch, and then he went like that. In other words, you keep scratching, it'll get infected, and it'll become a worse problem. So Srila Prabhupada gave that example, very instructive. Stay brahmachari.
The next time I think right in time sequence after that would have been when I was in the San Francisco temple as a brahmacharini. And Prabhupada would come to visit the San Francisco temple, but for some reason, I don't think there was a proper housing, room for him in the temple. But there was a couple who lived outside the temple in Berkeley, I believe, actually, and they had a very nice apartment, very nice place. And they would host Prabhupada there, and we would go there to clean up and do, chores for them and for Prabhupada while he was there. And then, so Prabhupada was having a little gathering. It was like there was some GBC there. There was, it was like, the temple president, all this and that. And I was still there because I had cleaned up his bathroom for him with another friend. We did this together. But I was still there. I didn't get the ride back. So since they were all important people in the room with Prabhupada, I didn't feel that I could go in. So I kind of sat in the hallway, and there was where all the shoes were. So I even sat on the shoes because, and because there was so many. And I, was kind of, and Prabhupada was sitting again, just as far as you are for me. And then he started chanting, playing mridanga, and he had his dhoti hiked up. He didn't no shirt, and he was just chanting. And everyone was chanting with him, and then he was done. He looked up, and he looked into where I was, and he said, and I'm looking like, and I looked behind myself, and I thought, oh gosh. I said, and I looked in the room, and it's all these, men, and they're all got important positions. And I'm thinking, I can't do this, So I just moved a little closer into the hallway and sat more on a lot of shoes. But, he just kept looking, he said, and again he said, but I just, there was no room. And nobody understood, But I was really surprised, that he would notice me back there. And, he didn't see really the difference. He didn't see the difference.
So somehow or other I decided in my mind, if I could find Srila Prabhupada at 8 different temples, this will be the perfection of my life. And of course, we didn't know how long Prabhupada was going to be on the planet. So some people said, no, you should stay and do your service. But I said, I got to do this. I have to do it. So Prabhupada happened to be in LA at the time, and he was going to Dallas, Atlanta, Miami, and New York. So for the devotees, we got a drive-away car, and we follow Prabhupada. So first temple, we missed Dallas because we wouldn't make it in time for Atlanta. So we decided Atlanta would be a better place to go. So we went to Atlanta, and Radha Damodar bus, there were 3 Radha Damodar bus with over 100 devotees, brahmacharis, and they had brand new dhoti, shaved head, and each one had a rose. So the first devotee went and offered the rose to Prabhupada and touched his feet. Now, nobody touched Prabhupada. You couldn't just walk up and touch Prabhupada's feet. This was like not kosher, something you don't do. So the first devotee went and offered the rose, touched Prabhupada's feet. So the next one did it, and so everybody that was there got to touch Prabhupada's feet. So that was great, because before that, I had that opportunity too in Los Angeles. I asked somebody, how could I touch Prabhupada's feet? I know that we're not supposed to. He said, when Prabhupada comes in the morning, he comes out of the door, comes and offers obeisance to the first set of deities. He says, you get behind Srila Prabhupada. Even if you have to push and shove, you do it. And when he's offering dandavats, you almost don't touch your head, but kind of, so you don't disturb him. So we don't want to disturb Prabhupada. So I went and I did it, and I did it. I put my head on Prabhupada's feet when he's offering dandavats. That's like stealing mercy from the Guru, but Guru Kripa is very important. We have to be greedy for the mercy of the spiritual master. So if by hook and crook, then you do it, but that's the only way to do it. So on this tour in Atlanta, back to Atlanta, Prabhupada taught us the song Udilo Aruna. First he said word by word, then line by line, and says, okay, now we will sing it. Says, give me a mridanga. I never seen Srila Prabhupada play the mridanga. So I thought, wow, I'm going to watch him to see play mridanga. So they brought him a drum, Atlanta, wintertime. These drums made out of leather, they go flat. So he play on the drum one time, says, useless. Bring another drum. Everybody running like crazy, and they bring another drum. Same thing, he hits it one time. And then he just like hit it 3 times, and the drum tuned up perfectly. To me, this was a miracle. Because I play drum a little bit, and usually winter time, that kind of drum, you have to put over a fire or something to make it. So Prabhupada said, very well. So he taught us the song. Then from there, we went to Gainesville. In Gainesville, the temple was in Coconut Grove, and Abhiram was the temple president. And there's a big banyan tree in the back, but there was no grass, it was only dirt. So he figured, better than sitting on the dirt, we'll get some dry leaves. So where do you get dry leaves to cover a huge area? So somebody said, let's go to the dump. People take leaves to the dump. So here we are, I don't know, 1 or 2 trucks, 10 devotees. We made 2 or 3 trips. We had the whole yard, took like 6 hours. Prabhupada comes into the temple. He goes in the backyard. He swung his cane like this over the leaves. He says, why don't they pick these leaves up? This would only create mosquitoes. And then he turned around and went back. So there we are. We're like, everybody like crazy picking up the leaves because he's about to give lecture soon. So there I am waiting to find Prabhupada. In Miami it was easy because there weren't that many devotees. And I was, I don't know, this far from Prabhupada, and I'm finding him. And I could see the mosquitoes. They'll come about this close to him, and they turn away. And I was like, wow. They were biting me, they were biting everybody else. And that's one of the times that he said, these mosquitoes here, they have respect, but in India, no respect. So then a person from the audience, some Rastafarian-looking guy, says, I hear Lord Shiva smokes ganja. And Srila Prabhupada smiled, and he said, yes, he does. He says, but also he drank an ocean of poison. So if you could drink this ocean of poison, then okay, then you could smoke. So everybody was amazed. Also, another person asked another question. He had a turban, he was a follower of Guru Nanak. And usually when somebody will name any guru, Prabhupada will say, I don't know who that is, or he'll just didn't answer. But in this case, he said, you're so fortunate to have a guru like Guru Nanak. And of course, we know that the Sikhs defended the Vaishnavas many, many times. So that I learned some history, and I learned that the mosquitoes in Miami had respect.
As I listened to Srila Prabhupada's lectures, I realized that not only was he brilliant, he was beyond mega genius brilliant. He knew everything about everything. There was a tree that grew on the driveway of the temple, and it was a strawberry guava tree. And it grew up for the first few years, very straight and tall. And suddenly it started bending to the right. The whole tree bent to the right and was growing in a right direction. And Srila Prabhupada walked under that tree, or was walking the temple grounds, and he said, this tree is trying to go into the temple to see Lord Chaitanya. And when he said that, it just struck me that not only does he know everything about nature, he knows everything about human nature as well.
Later we went on to, more familiar with the philosophy, and I am now a prasadam addict. I couldn't wait for the next Sunday feast. They had so many good cooks in those days in Hawaii. And Prabhupada visited, a few times, and sometimes he would stay length, but there was this one time when Srila Prabhupada came, I was outside working living outside the temple, working as a security guard. And my neighbor, he was a florist, and I heard that Srila Prabhupada was coming, and so I was, I gotta make some kind of offering, So as I went to work that night, I went to the neighbor's refrigerator, which was in his garage, and I wasn't thinking like I was stealing it or this, but actually that's what I was doing. I was a thief, and I was stealing these flowers. And but I took a huge box of carnations, and I took it to work that night, and I made a garland that was, would come down to like below Prabhupada's knees. And so I spent that night. So the next day I went to the temple. I brought the whole box of flowers to the temple, and Lakshman, the pujari, had taken all the flowers, and he had decorated the altar. There were flowers all over the floors. The deities were garlanded with, everything was very beautiful. And Srila Prabhupada's Vyasasana, they decorated nicely with all these pink and white, Hawaii carnations. They're very fragrant carnations. So when Prabhupada came in, he, offered his obeisances to the deities, and I had that long garland in my hand, and I asked the temple, when Prabhupada went to the Vyasasana, I asked, you think I could put my garland on Srila Prabhupada in my security guard uniform? You think? He kind of discouraged me. I don't know, but anyway, I went up anyway, and Prabhupada had like garlands like up to his nose, it's like, So I went up and I took my garland and I put it over his shoulders, and I took all the other flowers and I put it up on his lap, and then I offered obeisances. And Svatantra, one of the devotees that was there, he said that Prabhupada just looked at you, and when you were offering your obeisances, and he watched you, and so Svatantra thought that something magical was going to come out of that long glance by Srila Prabhupada observing me in that way. But anyway, I'm still here. But Prabhupada, when I offered my obeisances and got up, Prabhupada, he took my garland and he took it off. And I kind of went, oh, And then he took all the other garlands and he put them to the side. And then he took my garland and put it back on, And I felt pretty much, I guess, I don't know what you would say, maybe proud or or just astonished or something, you know. And then, so Prabhupada, he gives the lecture, and this was like, it was like a, what do you call those lectures when Prabhupada comes and he's just an arrival lecture, arrival speech or something, you know. Then in that speech he said that if we neglect to see the deity so nicely decorated, he said our hearts will become black, you know. And he went on to say that, you know, the lecture went on more and more, and then at the end of the lecture he goes, even if you're a thief, and if you take and you give to Krishna, you will benefit, you know. So anyway, the next day I went to the Kapilani Rose Garden, and then I took the most fragrant roses I could find. You know, I picked all these roses and made another garland, and still in my security guard uniform, Prabhupada went up to greet the deities. He walked up, and then I stepped out. Then he turned to me, and he was just this, I know so many devotees have described this smile that just blows you away with so much affection. And so I put that garland on Srila Prabhupada, and he went up and he sat down, and so again he took that garland off and he told Shrutakirti to take that garland like upstairs to the room. He's like, he gave you identity. You know, everyone is looking for that, for some distinction, you know, some adoration, you know, and he gave that, you know, he gave you that identity, and he gave you the affection you need to, you know, what we're always looking for. We're always looking for affection, and he gave it as you know, more than what you needed, you know, so to carry you through the you know, the times when you're full of anxiety. But he was powerful like that. You can see that love is the power. That affection was very powerful, and he was expert. You know, with expert in loving dealings. You know, he was capable of not putting, you know, the darkness into the association. You know, it was just always pure spirit, pure love. You know, so that's what I always saw in Srila Prabhupada. You know, he was always that just a beacon like that. You know, it radiated from him. He was always, and it was very powerful, very, very influential, and it was, you know, a spiritual influence.
So when I decided that I had to fan Prabhupada at 8 places, I inquired from people, how do you get to fan Prabhupada? And I heard different versions, but the one version that I used, this devotee told me, you stand next to the person fanning Srila Prabhupada, and if he stops for 1 second, you don't ask. You grab the camera and you start fanning. So I was like an eagle, just looking at this devotee. And a fly landed on his nose. So he stopped, and when he's trying to scare the fly, I grabbed the camera, and he was stunned. You know, he didn't know what to say or do. But I already had the camera, and Prabhupada is right there, so he's not gonna, you know, say like, oh, whatever. So I started fanning Prabhupada. So in those days, even to get close to Prabhupada's Vyasasana, it was difficult because you had all the GBCs, temple presidents, big devotees, and the little devotees couldn't get close enough to Prabhupada. So even to get enough close to fan him, it was even harder. But I was determined that if I could do this, it will be the perfection of my life. And then after Prabhupada disappeared, then I came to the realization that I performed this great, tiny little service, insignificant. But it was a pure devotee, and I had a determination to do it. And I felt that this is what human life is about. We have to serve Guru by any way we can, even if it's a small way or a big way. If you go to a dentist appointment, leave a little pamphlet on the bench. When people are at the checkout on the store, they say, "How you doing today?" You say, "Oh, I'm doing terrible. I cannot think of Krishna today." So we always have to think how to please Guru in any way we can, big or small. It's the attitude.
Another thing that I enjoyed very much being here in Hawaii, one of the advantages of being at this temple is that because it's so small and Prabhupada liked to stay here long periods of time, we all got a chance to go on morning walks with him. So we would go to different beach parks. The weather had never been more beautiful here in Hawaii. It was almost as if the demigods were trying to please Prabhupada by making the Hawaii weather even better. So we go to these incredible beaches and we would walk. He was translating the 5th canto, which was basically the structure of the universe, the cosmology of Krishna. I would hear him speak about things that were so incredible and mystical. He had talked about a fish called the Timangila. He says it's so huge it can swallow a whale whole. And he says, and this rock, we were at a beach, and there was a huge rock island just outside of the beach that was shaped like the Timangila. Had a huge bulbous head and then a little small section for the tail. We call that Rabbit Island. It's a huge island. But he said, that is the size and shape of the Timangila. And we were just dumbfounded. We were thinking, man, this is incredible. So I wanted more. I wanted to hear more of these mystical things, you know. So he talked about the Golden Mountain and the ocean of milk and the ocean of sugar water. So I just immediately decided I've got to get this 5th canto and peruse through it and find all this information.
So one time when I was in LA, and Prabhupada was giving a class, and there were so many devotees in the temple, and it was packed. And I don't remember so much about the class, and maybe I was even, getting a little sleepy. I'm not sure, but all of a sudden, Prabhupada, he raised his voice. I mean, it felt to me like he was almost shouting, and he said, that, "Do not think that your many strong sons will save you at the time of death. You have to fly your own airplane." And that's something that, has made a very deep impression, because so many people are so proud of their children, especially sometimes if they're boys, They're very proud, and they think that by having them, their future is taken care of. But Prabhupada was saying, do not think that. Do not think that they're going to save you at the time of death. You have to save yourself. You have to fly your own airplane.
Once Srila Prabhupada was leading all of us in Jaya Madhava prayers, and tears started flowing from his eyes, and they were rolling down his cheeks. And when he was finished, he said, "This song is so wonderful because everything is there. Krishna, the cows, the gopis, the gopas, his parents, his extended family, the forests of Vrindavan, the Jamuna River, everything is there. This is so wonderful." And another time I was sitting on the side of Srila Prabhupada, and he was chanting the Maha Mantra so forcefully, with so much impact and so powerfully, and tears were flying out of his eyes. I was on the side looking at him, and I could see these tears. They were like arrows, and they were flying towards the deities. just like someone took a bow and shot an arrow. These tears were straight as arrows, and they were flying towards the deities.
Again, Srila Prabhupada is in Atlanta. We were visiting him. Srila Prabhupada had just finished offering arti, and he was sitting on his Vyasasan. And he asked, where was Tulsi? He sat on his Vyasasan for, at least a minute, looking. And then he asked, where is Tulsi? And the devotees weren't exactly sure what he was referring to. So they brought Tulsi and put it on Srila Prabhupada's Vyasasan. And Srila Prabhupada said, not there. Tulsi should be higher. So they put Tulsi on a higher spot. And then he also made a point that Tulsi should always be on the altar. Very instructive point how important Tulsi is in our society. Prabhupada wanted that Tulsi is always there. I'll never forget that. Wonderful pastime.
So the morning, we went to a morning walk on Magic Island. And when when we were out there, I couldn't pay attention to the conversation that was going on, because growing up in Hawaii, I used to I surfed my whole life. It was like born in the water there, and like body surfing when we were like 2-3 years old, and surfing, that was like very was very attached to that activity, because it was so much fun. And so that morning walk, I'm watching the waves. The waves were up. It was about 6, 7, 8 foot waves at Ala Moana, right off Magic Island there. So the whole time I'm glancing over and looking at the waves. Oh my gosh! After this morning program, I'm going to head out. So we all we did the walk. I can't remember one thing that was about the conversation on the walk. But then when we came back to the temple, the Srimad Bhagavatam class, Prabhupada gave the lecture. I can't remember what verse, but he did mention, he said, just like those boys out in the water, what do you call them? Suffers? And everybody laughed when he said suffers, and then someone in the audience goes, oh, surfers, Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada laughed. He goes, oh, I call them suffers. And he went on to say, now I heard, because I wanted to go surfing that day, but I heard that day that when he was speaking, he said, if those boys out in the water, if they spend their whole time surfing and not cultivate Krishna consciousness, they will take birth as fish. Now that was on the tape, but what I heard, I don't know, maybe there was a special mystical addition in there where I heard Prabhupada say, if you spend your whole time surfing and not cultivate Krishna consciousness, you'll take birth as fish. So later when I went back to my house, Kailash Chandra, oh, you remember what Prabhupada said, you can take birth as a fish. I said, well, I heard that if you spend your whole time surfing and not cultivate Krishna consciousness, you'll take birth as a fish. So then I went, grabbed my board and head out to the beach. Anyway.
After about a year living here in Hawaii, I was interested in art, and I had been communicating with Radharani. I sent her some sketches, and she said that she would welcome me if I came to LA and work with the artist. So I immediately made that my goal. So I got permission from the temple here in Hawaii to go to LA. And I went there, met Radharani, and we got established there as one of the artists. So I would help with some of the paintings, doing a lot of the details. We all would do a group work on paintings. So one day, Prabhupada wanted to see just the artists, and he wanted us to bring our paintings. And at the time, I was working on a beautiful painting of Krishna under a beautiful tree with his flute and a cow. And I worked very hard on it. All the devotees thought it was very beautiful. So I thought, now I get to show this to Prabhupada. How fortunate. So we all came up to the Prabhupada's room in the Los Angeles temple with our paintings, and we all sat around. Prabhupada spoke a little bit about Krishna, and then we all took turns coming up to him with our paintings. I don't remember much what he said about any of the paintings of the other artists, but when I got up, he didn't even look at my painting. He was looking at me. And I just felt this powerful purging, and I just threw my head down. So then he looked back up. He said, "You are all doing paintings of Krishna, standing by the Jamuna." He says, "Are you reading my books?" And he said, "If you read my books, you will find that Krishna is not just standing by the Jamuna. He's doing all kinds of fantastic things." He says, "So I want to see a book, just paintings of Krishna doing his pastimes. You flip a page and he's doing this, another page he's doing that." He says, "That is what I would like to see." He says, "Right now you all have come to me with these paintings and they're all similar." He says, "So read my books." So that was my instructions. I took that as my instructions from Prabhupada.
So I had one of the newest Radha Damodar traveling Sankirtan vans, and Srila Prabhupada was preparing to go on his morning walk. He walked up to the van saying that it was brand new, and he was going to take that van. That happened to be my traveling Sankirtan van. We just got back from traveling Sankirtan for a few weeks. So when they opened the door to let Srila Prabhupada in, the van was a total mess. So Srila Prabhupada wouldn't take the van, wouldn't go inside. And he explained that we should clean our vehicles every day. We'll take better care for them. So the next morning, Srila Prabhupada again came to my van. That evening, I was supposed to clean the van. That evening, we were harassed by the police, chased all over. I was running and picking up devotees. So again, I didn't get a chance to clean the van. The next morning, again, Srila Prabhupada wanted to use my van. He wouldn't go inside. But he didn't make any further comment. Srila Prabhupada's so kind.
We would ask him, at the time, Prabhupada was telling us there may be a war. Krishna had told him that there may be a war, and we were concerned about what would happen after the war. And he said preaching would be very good. Just chant Hare Krishna, take shelter of the Lord. So then that led to, in the conversation, someone asking, "What happens to us, Srila Prabhupada, after you leave this planet? What then?" And Prabhupada said, "Do not worry. Krishna will send so many good-hearted souls, and so many devotees will come forward to help you. Do not worry."
There was Sarva Satya and Kailash Chandra and myself. I said, "Oh, I'll help you guys bring these." They were making these fabricated marble, and they're thinking they're going to make deities out of this synthetic marble. So I said, I'll help you take it up to Prabhupada's room, because I wanted to see another, something new about Srila Prabhupada, because he was always refreshing and always doing something, progressive in his stay with us, So I went upstairs to help them bring those, and Govinda dasi came up, and so Prabhupada came out of the room, and Govinda dasi said, "Well, Srila Prabhupada, we have this synthetic marble, we can make deities," and Prabhupada goes, "Will it break?" And he said, "How will you ship?" And he said, well, good ship, plane, and Prabhupada goes, will it break? And Govinda Dasi said, well, Prabhupada, I think. He goes, Prabhupada stopped there, goes, I think? I think means I don't know. And he walked out of the room. And that was the end of the conversation. I was, like, wow, So that was quite amazing.
Being here in Hawaii, I learned that we established the first Hare Krishna restaurant. Prabhupada wanted it called Govinda's. Before I even came to the temple, I was in Hawaii and I found a neat little sandwich shop, and I went in, it was beautiful. I had wonderful pita bread, avocado, cheese sandwich, and they had some other nice things, smoothies. I found out that that was a Hare Krishna restaurant. Prabhupada asked about it while he was here. He wanted to know how was the restaurant doing. And they said, oh, it's doing fine, Prabhupada. He says, so are they helping the temple? And they says, well, you can speak with Tarun Kunti and Revati Ramana. They are running this thing. So Prabhupada had a meeting with them, and he wanted to know what was going on with the restaurant. So they explained that, well, Prabhupada, the restaurant's doing really nicely, but there are a lot of expenses, and so once we take care of all the expenses and buy food, there's not really a lot left, to give the temple, because he was concerned about that, if they were giving money to the temple, and they weren't. So Prabhupada made a solution. He said, okay, what we can do is, I understand that you, Tarun Kunti, your family is living in a condominium, and then Revati Ramana, you and your family are living in another condominium. He said, these condominiums are large enough, the two of you could live in one condominium, and then the money you're spending on the other, you can give to the temple. They did not like that idea, and I think one of them said, Prabhupada, we can't do that. So Prabhupada very sternly looked at them and said, then you've stolen my restaurant, and I want it back. Manaswi was the temple president at the time. He was a young Indian man who was running the temple here. And Manaswi decided to infiltrate the restaurant. So he sent me down. I was one of the new bhaktas. So he said, Bhakta Howard, you go down there and start helping out, washing dishes and stuff, and let them know that this is our restaurant. So I was kind of like the pawn in this situation. And I went down, and they kind of treated me illy, they knew what I was there for, and they weren't very nice. But I didn't care. I was fulfilling the order of Prabhupada. And so I was there with my dhoti and tilak and everything, I could see that Prabhupada was on a mission, and he was serious. It was no nonsense, but yet he was kind. He was not harsh. He was not condescending. He didn't make them feel bad. They had some kind of attachment that even Prabhupada could not shake. So that was when he got a little firm and let them know that you're stealing my temple, you're stealing my restaurant. And I thought that that was a good instruction for them. I learned from that point on that Prabhupada does chastise his disciples, but when he chastises them, it is not out of any type of dislike or hatred. He loved everyone, and he wanted us to do everything properly for Krishna. That was very important for him. So I took that instruction.
Srila Prabhupada always was encouraging us to preach. He said it was so important for us to spread this, help him spread this Krishna consciousness movement all over the world. And he would say we'd have to do this before the world goes mad. And I always thought, when he used the word mad, that he was using the British sense of the word, which is crazy. We had to preach, we had to deliver these books to others, distribute love of God before the world goes crazy. But I was recently watching a YouTube clip, and Srila Prabhupada said, "When I say mad, I mean the sum total of all stupidity." So I'm glad he cleared that up, the difference between craziness and stupidity.
Like when things got really bad for me and really terrible, I always, I guess, mentally take shelter of Prabhupada and think of him and think it's going to be all right. It's going to be all right. He's never going to leave me. He's my friend. He'll always be with me. He's right there. He's not going anywhere. He's not leaving me. And I think, and he has all the answers. You know, so what, you know, why go anywhere else? Why do anything else? You know, because you found someone you can really trust. Someone you can really trust. Never going to let you down. I mean, we're all infallible, and I mean, you know, and Prabhupada was human, but he never wavered. He didn't waver. There's always continual trust.
I think the quality that impressed me the most of Srila Prabhupada was his depth of Krishna consciousness, his vast learning, as well as his being able to engage so many different personalities in Krishna's service. Srila Prabhupada appreciated all of the services rendered. Of course, we were doing Sankirtan. Srila Prabhupada really encouraged Sankirtan, preaching, book distribution. Srila Prabhupada told us, because of course he was building Mumbai, he was building Vrindavan, he was building Mayapur. So we were giving huge donations every month to Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada was very appreciative. And Srila Prabhupada didn't overlook, he said, even if people give 1 farthing, they're saved from going to the deepest, darkest regions of hellish existence. That impressed me. That impressed me, that how kind Krishna is, how kind Srila Prabhupada is, that even if we gave him farthings, he respected it as being, you know, our offering, and we're making advancement in Krishna consciousness.
I will start by saying that I was in Los Angeles, and there's these little fences where the bodies sit down. And Prabhupada was coming out walking. And he went to Prabhupada and said, "Srila Prabhupada, I must have done so many austerities in previous life to become your devotee, to meet you." And Prabhupada says, "You didn't do anything. It's all my mercy." So Prabhupada had so much mercy that you didn't have to talk to him. You didn't have to, simply by being in his presence. In Los Angeles Temple, there's a garden, and on the 2nd floor, there is a prasadam room. And we used to go on and look at Prabhupada when he's in the garden, because you could never get tired seeing Prabhupada. Everything he did, it was like those people that do Tai Chi. His movements were delicious. Everything he did, it was like perfect. So we love just to watch him. And sometimes he would look up, and there would be like 5, 6, 10 faces. So he told Karandar, he says, I don't like this. He says, I want to sit here, and I don't want people up there looking at me. So they put paper on the windows, but we were allowed to make tiny little holes on these papers. And of course, we would be looking through these little holes just to see Srila Prabhupada. And if you ever saw Prabhupada, every time he gave class, and everybody will tell you this, he will look straight into every one person in that room. He will look right into your eyes, And for that second, you will feel it. You will feel that mercy. You just feel, you could see that he's looking right through you. There's nothing you can hide. So to me, he's like the most wonderful, the most merciful. And mercy is very, very important. And Srila Prabhupada had the most mercy. He didn't distinguish whether you were white, black, old, young, poor, professional. Didn't matter. You're a spirit soul, and he's here to take you back home. If you just give him the chance. If you just, like he said, I wasn't very bright or very smart, but I'd listen. And my Guru Maharaj noticed that, and he said, I noticed that everybody gets up and moves, starts scratching, but you listen very good. So that's one thing very important, to listen. Because Shravan and Kirtan, first, before we could talk about Krishna, we have to listen about Krishna.
Well, I think what stood out with Prabhupada was whenever I was in his presence, I was feeling something very intense, and I knew it was coming from him. Once, after a Sunday feast, I was kind of, it was a little lull, and so I came and sat on the stairway that came up to his room, and I was just sitting there, and all of a sudden it was like a blast of wind just came right through me. It came out of the room where Prabhupada was present, and it was like this breeze of ecstasy just came and went right through me. And I felt what I understood to be transcendental bliss. All of my cares and problems just went away. I could clap my heels together and do cartwheels. That's how I felt. And I knew that it was coming from him. So I've been around a lot of people, and I've gone to a lot of concerts, all these great rock stars, people that you admire. But when Prabhupada stepped out of the limousine or out of the airplane, anywhere, that prema bhakti just inundated the area. And it was very, very prominent. Some people saw auras, but I could feel that prema bhakti. And that's when I said, I will follow this man to the end. No one made me feel happy like he did.
Well, he was expert. Srila Prabhupada was expert, you know, as far as knowing what to say, knowing what to do. You know, I always saw him as expert. I used to tell my mother was, she was very doubtful in the beginning of the, when I first joined the movement. She said she used to pray to Jesus that I would leave the Hare Krishna movement. But as I was chanting and following the process, she began to recognize that I was changing and I was improving. And so this is, you know, I always felt that type of confidence in Srila Prabhupada, that I would always improve and everything would get better. He had, I used to tell my mother that there's, you know, you look at other old people out there, and there's no older person or teacher that could ever compare to the presence that Srila Prabhupada had. He had a presence that was very potent and very inviting, you know, that was very welcoming. And you always felt that he understood you, you know, that he knew who you were. Like Prabhupada said one time, you know, they asked him, Prabhupada, you know, you have so many disciples, do you know them? You know, and Prabhupada would say, I know their very heartbeat. I know the very heartbeat of my disciples. So in that way, you always felt that he knew you, and he, there's always a link and a bond, especially after initiation. You know, you feel that link. You always felt cared for, and in a sense that he knew what the greatest welfare was for humanity. You know, and in his voice, he was always so convincingly speaking, you know. So you felt that he was speaking the truth, and he wasn't, you know, telling you fairy tales or some, you know, moral story that comes from books that, you know, to teach you lessons. You know, he was teaching you the full truth of anything, you know, that particular subject matter. You know, he was like that, potent in that way.
One special memory of Srila Prabhupada is my mother was very concerned about me, and I moved into the temple April 1st, 1975, and he arrived on May 20th, 1975, and he stayed until June 25th, 1975. So he was there about 5 weeks at that time. So I invited my mother to come and meet Srila Prabhupada and to get more insight into what I'm doing, where I'm living, what's going on, just to put herself at ease. I was hoping that would do that. So she agreed, and she came, and my mother's native Hawaiian. Her family goes back to the 1600s in Hawaii. And she was a hula dancer since age 4. She was very athletic and a hatha yoga instructor for the last 30 years of her life. And she liked yoga. She liked the hatha yoga because she felt centered and a greater sense of peace. So I thought, well, maybe she will like what I'm doing. So when she arrives, it was a Sunday feast, and when she arrived at the temple, I said, Mom, just follow me, just do everything I do. And so she did. And we're sitting there on the side of the Vyasa-san, and we're listening to Srila Prabhupada. And I said to her, do you understand what he's saying? And she said, oh yes, I think so, yes. And afterwards, she said to me, I like your guru very much. You are in very good hands. I don't have to worry about you anymore. So the next, she loved the deities, she loved the prasadam, she loved the incense, she loved the rhythms, she loved the Maha Mantra. I was so pleased that it was such a positive experience for her. And the next day, I went out to Waikiki and distributing Back to Godhead magazines. And when the devotees, Sankirtan devotees, we all returned to the temple, we walked into the prasadam room because we were hungry and thirsty, and there were 4 huge boxes of mangoes, beautiful Hayden mangoes, yellow and red mangoes. So I yelled into the kitchen, are these mangoes offered? And they said, yes, they are, help yourself. And I said, where did they come from? And the cook walked out of the kitchen and he said, your mother brought them this morning. She said she got your aunt and your uncle to help her pick these mangoes from your grandfather's tree. And I had just read in the Nectar of Devotion that someone can be moved to spontaneous devotional service just by seeing a pure devotee for the first time. And I immediately thought, the Nectar of Devotion is right. This is actually true. This happened. My mother did spontaneous devotional service, and I was so pleased. And thank you, Srila Prabhupada, for all your blessings. Thank you for all your mercy. And thank you for giving me this opportunity, this wonderful life, which I now enjoy. It's great.